Okay, in the last video, I showed you how to do audio recording in the browser using voice over IP in Zencastr. Now we're going to do it locally on your Mac, on your machine, so you can take your laptop, take your hardware device, the Scarlett, and your microphones to an office or a co-working space or a coffee shop and just get that recording locally instead of doing it over the net. So you're probably going to have a better quality recording because you're not going to have any latency because you're directly in front of somebody. Now, this software is $60. I think it's really well priced if you're going to be doing podcasts every single week or doing twice a week. You're probably looking at about 100 podcasts a year. So for $60, it's reasonably cheap. It's cost of a latte, I guess, a coffee for the software. And I find this software better than other software that's out there on the market. I've been using this since version 1. It's version 3 now. I'm going to jump into the software and show you how it works. This is my fully made, ready to go podcast session. But if you're doing a session from scratch, if you click on the top bar, session, new session, it gives you a template chooser to get started. So you're not just given a blank canvas or a blank scene and not knowing what to do with it. You can click on podcast. So we can do another one like that. And it gives you this default setup, which is the two mics, two recorders to record individual ones, and then another recorder to combine the two together. Now that works pretty well. I'm going to show you how to configure these input devices for this hardware though, because it might throw you a little bit like it did me when I was recording this video, because I haven't done local recording for some time. So this is what a session looks like. On the right hand side, you have these drop downs. I'm going to close them all so you can see them all. We have sources, outputs, built-in effects, advanced meters, audio unit effects. Each one of these is a block, and each one of these blocks can be dragged to this stage. So you've got sources, which are your input sources. So it might be from an app, from a mic, from system-wide audio. Outputs can be a recorder or an output device, so headphones, so you can listen back in real time. Built-in effects, so you can do kind of EQing, balance, bass and treble. You can really fine-tune the audio signal that you get. And then there's a few little advanced sessions, blocks in there for the different sessions. And then also meters, so you can do VU meters as you're recording, so you can see what the levels look like. So let me explain quite quickly, because the whole point of this podcast is to try and get you going within 45 minutes to an hour. You've bought the hardware, you've had it delivered with Amazon Prime the next day, you want to get the software running, you've got a time scale to get to. So let's get into how this works. On the left hand, we're going to go from left to right. That's pretty much how this works. On the left hand side, we have these two input devices, which is the same box, but we're looking at the microphone from each input. So the Scarlett has two inputs on it. Now, this is where it threw me a little bit, and I had to reevaluate and go over this, and I'm glad I've had to re-record this in some ways because I don't have to start and stop and edit this file now. So if we double-click on this, double-clicking on any of these blocks gives you the advanced settings. You can turn that block on and off. You can see it grays out when it's not being on. So we're going to leave that on. I've got the audio device selected as the Scarlett 212 USB, and this is where you might have issues in terms of getting only mono, like a mono sound coming out of your headphones. So what you have to do is, I've got one input here on channel 1, and I'm making that mono mic, the lavalier mic that I've got, going to the left channel and the right channel. So it's basically imaging the mono mic to go stereo. So it comes through the left and right of your headphones. So you have to do that twice. So I'm on effectively mic 1 and Dale is on mic 2. Now you see what I've done here on the second one is left channel 2, right channel 2, which basically means take the mono inputs from both mics, flip them into stereo so that through the headphones, we're both coming out of left and right of the headphones. Fairly straightforward, but it can throw you through a loop because it sets these normally as default. And the default would just be the mono input. So double check that before you actually start recording to make sure that you've got a stereo input. The next thing I do then is I go straight into my output device, which is a DAC. And I use a DAC to clean up the audio for my headphones, just for system-wide audio, for gaming, for listening to YouTube, things like that. And I realized that the output device really needs to be the next thing, because if you have this at the end of this block cycle of the EQ, the the multiband compressor, the declick, the dehum, it adds a little bit of latency to it, because obviously the system is processing that audio and it throws the audio out. So when you're talking, it throws you off because it's just that slight millisecond out. So it makes the real-time feedback in your headphones pretty bad. So I have an output device is the USB DAC, and then I've got a headphone into that, so you can't hear the audio in the room. It's just going through my headphones, and I can hear the 2 inputs from each person. So if both of us want to hear the audio, I just put in a splitter, headphone splitter into that DAC, and then we both have headphones run into that, so we can both hear our levels for any background sound, or just to hear how loud we actually sound if we're far away from the mic or if we're near the mic. So that's kind of a nice little monitoring tip there. Now above that, I also have system audio, and obviously you can turn that on and off just by right clicking, turn off, turn on. Very simple. That grabs system wide audio. So if you've got a sound desk, or you've got something where you click on a button to play a sound, or you want to play some audio like a music from, I don't know, Spotify, something like that, then you can do that into the podcast. I'll talk about this one on the far right, this AU audio player, in a little bit as I get over to that side, but that's probably the best way to play music in your podcast. But you could fire up anything. Be aware though, if you have this system audio on, for clicks and bleeps and things that might be kicking off in the background. If you're on a website, if you're on YouTube or something, be very aware of that. It's probably best to keep that turned off. But remember that you have to turn that on and off to get the audio. Then what I do, and these are the bits that you're going to probably spend a bit of time playing with for your own environment, and I suggest that you do this. You don't have to have the EQ, the compressor, the declick, the dehum. In fact, I've got the dehum turned off because it was a little bit OTT over the top. So I've got the 10-band EQ set on vocal booster. I've got the multi-band compressor set as the default values, and I've got the declick set as manual, and I just did that in real time while I was listening to both of us. Again, this section here is where you spend the most time as an audio engineer learning how to pre-process audio. I'm not an audio engineer, but I know what sounds good through my headphones, and that's good enough for me. Like, you could probably spend 10,000 hours learning software, hardware, different devices to be able to be an audio engineer, which is when somebody does mastering at a production broadcast level. That's where having an ear for it and knowing all the individual settings really comes into play. But from a basic point of view, to get a podcast going, the few settings in here can really enhance the sound of the podcast. Then at the end, we have these VU meters. So if I just record, let me get my little microphone. If I just click on record, bottom left-hand corner, you can see that my input is quite large on the EQ. It's going through there. And then the bottom input at the bottom there is the other microphone. It's going through the DAC, and then it goes through the EQ. But most importantly, you can see that the VU meters left and right are moving. And then the next one that goes, I'm going to stop recording because I can hear myself in my headphones as well. The next box we have is the recorder. Now, if I double click on this, you can see that I've adjusted the advanced recording options to jack up the audio quality to be bitrate 320 kilobits at constant bitrate. That would be the file normally on Zencastr that I would spit out is an MP3 file. What we're doing here slightly differently than Zencastr is that we're doing it live. So instead of recording like WAV files locally and then running it through the post-production, we're actually doing the post-production live and writing it straight to an MP3 file. Now you're probably thinking, why use MP3? Why not just use Apple Lossless or FLAC? You know, like any of these file formats that are lossless. And the reason for that is at some point I have to compress that file because we can't upload a lossless file to some of these hosting sites because it will just get compressed at that end anyway, or some of those websites only support MP3 uploads. So we want it as high quality as possible. So 320 kilobits. There's a difference in the bit rate here. You can do variable or average. I do constant. So I want 320 kilobits constant all the way through. Sample rate standard for stereo audio is 44/100. Your device might support more than that. I have had issues previously on my Mac when I've run at 48,000 hertz, so I tend to run it at 44. And then I've got joint stereo for the channel, so that it's just imaging that sound that we bring input as a joint stereo MP3 file. And then at the top here, you can see podcast input, date, time. That's the title. Then it's going to spit out into the audio hijack folder. At this point in the recorder, if I want to as well, I can drag my artwork and put in the artist column and some comments in there so people can find the podcast. And that's kind of valuable because if your MP3 file gets sent around the web or it's on a BitTorrent or something like that, people can right click on that file, look at the meta information, or if they're importing it into iTunes, iTunes will pick up on that information in the file and title it accordingly. This is a valuable thing to do because the date and the time will be written away into the metadata of that file. And if somebody's listening to that in a car, then they're going to get the latest version sorted to the top. So it's very important that you set those settings in there because people don't want to be messing around like, is this the latest one? I've listened to the latest one. Power tip as well that I had from Jason Jarrett of a Buddhist podcast. Always remember to say what number and what the date is in the first like 10-15 seconds of your podcast, because somebody traveling, commuting in a car can know if they're listening to the latest one or not. All right, so that's pretty much the whole session all the way across. And then this last thing is the audio player, which is another block. And you can see I've got my intros in here and I can click on play and then start recording. Click on recording, mute the two mics, start the intro off, or actually we can just be talking and then I can play the intro in the middle of the track and that gets put in straight into the recorder. You'll notice I put it on the end here because I'm avoiding running that music through the compressor, the EQ and the D-click. I want it actually to sound a little bit different than the audio podcast. So when you're listening to the podcast, there's a distinction between the input being EQ'd and sounding different to the sound file directly. So everything that's been done with the sound file is already ready for broadcast. So I don't need to enhance that file. That's pretty much my podcast recording locally from two mics using the Scarlett. Like I say, you'll probably spend a bit of time tweaking the 10-band EQ, the compressor and D-click, but very easy to set up and you can be pretty much done on this in about 15-20 minutes.